We about ready? Okay, welcome to our midweek Bible study. Each of us come Wednesday night to kind of get our booster shot or whatever to help us make it through the rest of the week. And it is such a joy, such an encouragement to see all of you and everybody else. Those of you that are streaming, we appreciate you being a part of our midweek Bible study. Thank you for tuning in, and everybody that is here. We're glad you're here. We're nearing the end. As Larry Jones would say, we're in the fourth quarter now. He talks about the fourth quarter of our lives, the young at heart folks, but we in this class, duration-wise, or nearing the end. However, there has been a little confusion, maybe with some of us, but there are actually 2 more Wednesday night lessons in this quarter. It just so happens that we got a baker quarter, I guess 1 more than usual, like a baker's dozen is 13. We got a baker's quarter, so 2 more weeks. Looking forward to that, and I'll be teaching. I'm reluctant to say who's teaching because, you may just tune me out or not show up or something, but David and I will continue sharing the mic the next 2 weeks. And so, first of all, I'm going to review our prayer list, and I've asked Trey Westmoreland to lead us in prayer, but we have Christy White, the sister of Lori Helms, that's having her 3rd chemo treatment, or she just had it. Some of this is last week's information. Remember Tabitha Schaefer as she continues her chemo treatment. She keeps most of us very updated on her Facebook page, and she is really going through a lot, but she is so positive and so encouraging to all of us as she shares her experience and her journey with us. Also, Greg Clark, remember him? He's here tonight. So continuing on working, and his cancer is stable. Is that correct, Greg? Is that kind of the latest? So, all right, good news. Remember Ron Missildine. He is scheduled today. He had an MRI today. I think he's kind of on I can't remember if he's on a monthly or on of course, a periodic MRI, and always those of you that have either had cancer or family members, every time there's a scan, every time there's an MRI, whatever, they're always anxious about it. So we're anxious to find out exactly the news from Ron's MRI today. Also, Jennifer Macon is an extended family member of Goran and Kimberly Benson, who had complications from a hip surgery, and we want to remember her. Also pray for her husband Alan. So also we have several of our members that have lost loved ones. We want to remember Molly King's family with the passing of her sister Anna Cook. We also want to remember Deborah Wass. Back in the spring sometime, Deborah moved out to Plano, Texas to be with her family and to help her parents. And her dad passed away Friday. And so I think she's just going to continue to stay out there and help her mother. We also want to remember the Jeff Holmes family on the passing of his dad, Cliff. We also remember Missy Hester's family on the passing of her dad, James Russell. And so as you see, we have a lot of our family members with special needs, and so let's remember them. I'm going to ask Trey, if he will, now to lead our minds in prayer.
We just want to thank you for this opportunity to be here together and the beautiful weather you gave us today and the chance to get out tonight. And we ask that you be with several people tonight. We ask that you be with those that are battling cancer right now. We ask that you be with Christy White and Tabitha Schaefer and Greg Clark and Ron Misseldine. And just ask that you be with the doctors and nurses working with them and help them to make the decisions that'll treat their cancer the best and help them to recover. We ask that you be with Jennifer Macon and also Gorn and Kimberly Benson as they're helping with her situation, and ask you also be with her doctors as they try to figure out exactly the next steps and what they need to do. And we also ask you with the families that have recently lost loved ones, that we ask you be with the family of Anna Cook and Kenneth Cherry and also Cliff Holmes and James Russell. And we just ask that you comfort their families and bring them the peace that only you can. And we just ask you with John tonight as he brings our class to us and help him remember things he's prepared and help us to learn as much as we can about David and learn to have a heart like he did. And just want to thank you for all the many blessings you give us. And most of all, we want to thank you for Jesus and him coming down on the cross to save us from our sins. In his name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Trey. Thank you very much, Trey. For the past several Sundays, Brandon and Andrew have been sharing lessons with us from different individuals in the Bible who are going through either peaks or valleys. And in our lives, there are times when we're on plateaus and things are just kind of steady state or whatever, but then that doesn't usually last very long, because then we're either going up on the peak or we're coming down into the valley. So tonight, as we look at the lesson on David's exile from and return to Jerusalem, he is in a very deep, dark valley. This is just one of the saddest times. Other than Bathsheba and his sin and all the things that occurred after that, tonight's lesson is one of the saddest, because we always remember David as a warrior, as a man who was constantly in battles. He was always rallying the troops. The thing was, his enemies changed, because we remember when he started as king of the southern kingdom of Judah, there were constant battles with Israel. You know, they were family, but there were these civil wars, so to speak, with Israel. Then there were times whenever he jumped over in the Philistines. Many times he was fighting the Philistines as his enemy. Then there were times he joined them, and we're going to see in tonight's lesson a continuation of some of these people that he joined with through his lifetime to help defeat other nations, other tribes, other people. But the saddest part, and he's always aggressive, he's always proactive, he is on the move and always ready and prepared for battle. Tonight is a sad situation as we picture what is about to happen in his life. David Morrison last week ended the lesson in 2 Samuel chapter 15, the first few verses. Remember, Absalom has been away from David for about 5 years. He spent 3 years in Geshur there. Then he moved back to Jerusalem, but it says that he spent 2 years there in the same city with David, yet they never saw, he said, they were never face to face. So during this time, Absalom has been building and planning a coup. And so as we look at 2 Samuel chapter 15 and verse 13 to kind of start or to finish from the lesson last week. And it says, a messenger came and told David, the hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom. Absalom's coup in Hebron had been a success, and his support had spread up and down Israel from Dan to Beersheba. And you know that's always on the map. That means from the most northern to the most southern. The momentum had definitely shifted in Absalom's favor. So as we look at the conspiracy here, we're going to see David fleeing. This is so unnatural, fleeing from Jerusalem, and it's not going to be pretty at all as we look at verses 14 through 17. And then we're going to see some of the people in his life that are friends. And we're going to see Ittai there. We're also going to see Zadok and the two priests there. We're going to see Hushai. And at least David had a plan. It appears when we read this next verse that there wasn't a plan, that he was just in a hurry. He rushed out of the city and he was headed, as you can see, he was headed northeast out of Jerusalem there. So, of course, this right here is where it all starts. You can see here Absalom's group coming in from the south, and then you have David and his followers, the people that are loyal to him, exiting on the east side of the city. So as we look at this, it says in verse 14, come, we must flee, and none of us will escape from Absalom. We must leave immediately, or he will move quickly to overtake us and bring ruin upon us and put the city to the sword. David's just heard the report about Absalom. He calls for an urgent evacuation. Doesn't have time to make very much preparation. And so we're going to see Absalom's forces seem to be entering from the south, as I said, as David's group is leaving from the east. And the king's servants, this is how loyal, though, we see. And this is the first of our disciple lesson tonight. Is going to be on friends, because this is going to be all about friends. People who had some that were very new in David's life, and others that had been with him for a long time. And this is how they responded. They said, behold, your servants are ready to do whatever my lord the king decides. See, they're still acknowledging he is the king because he is the king. But, of course, Absalom and the coup trying to take over. The king set out, and with his entire household following him, but he left 10 concubines to take care of the palace. And the king went out and all the people after him, and they halted at the last house. Can you imagine? David leaving Jerusalem, he's headed out on foot, and he gets to the outskirts of the town, and now he's going to stop. And he's going to watch the people as they pass by, knowing that all of the people that leave are people that are loyal to him. And he would not only, of course, be thinking about the people that he sees leaving, he'll be thinking about the people that stay, that are not loyal to him, because they're going to stay there with the coup and join Absalom's forces. So can you imagine, such a sad picture there. What a sad sight. David having to leave the city of Zion, the city of David. It was named after him. He had been there as the king in Jerusalem for about 23 years, a long time. And now then, he's about 60 years old. And so now he is leaving the city. As we look at his friends and remember our Made for Monday is for us to be an Abraham to a Lot, someone who needs a friend. And what we're going to see here in this lesson, and I hope that we've been doing that ourselves, find someone. You don't have to look very far at all. You look at our prayer list, you listen to people and what's going on in their lives, and everybody needs somebody. And so we're going to see these people who were his friends. The first one that comes by is Ittai, the Gittite, and he marches by with his army of 600 Gittite mercenaries. Remember, he's from the city of Gath. These were the Philistines that David had joined with and had fought with against, some of the Israelites and the northern kingdom, different ones. So these mercenaries from the Philistine area come by and they're joining him. And here's David's response. He says, "You're a foreigner. This isn't your fight. You go home. Take your men and y'all go home." They had no idea what was about to happen. They were risking their lives, but they chose. And here's their response. "As surely as the Lord lives, and as my Lord the King lives, wherever my Lord the King may be, whether it means life or death, there will be your servants." And so we see they're loyal, and this kind of describes the whole countryside as we look at verse 23 of chapter 15. "The whole countryside wept aloud as all the people passed by." What a sad situation. Now we're going to see, and we're going to start learning a little about the plan that David had orchestrated before he left. Even though it appeared he was in a rush, didn't plan, but here's the plan as it unfolds. As we look at verses 23 through 28, we're going to see that Zadok and Abiathar came out of the city carrying the Ark of the Covenant. Remember how David was the one that had made sure that the Ark of the Covenant was transported back to Jerusalem. Here they are leaving the city with the Ark of the Covenant. But we're going to see that David stops them. And here's what David says. "Take the Ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the Lord's eyes, he will bring me back and let me see it and his dwelling place again. But if he says, I am not pleased with you, then I am ready. Let him do to me whatever he seems good." See David's faith. See David's loyalty and trust in God. He says, you go back. We know that's the place of worship. You take the Ark of the Covenant back. So if we really didn't know better, we would think that this was kind of fatalistic of David, this idea that, hey, just go back into the city. But as we read a couple of verses later, we're going to realize that there was a plan. Not the priests were not only going to take the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem for worship purposes. There is a network using the priests who are there. And what we're going to notice is there are going to be spies in Jerusalem to keep David informed as to what's going on and what he needs to do. And so Zadok and Abiathar, their sons, Jonathan and Ahimaaz, are going to be part of the plan for escape. It said, the king also said to Zadok, the priest, are you not a seer? This is verses 27 and 28. Go back to the city in peace with your two sons, Ahimaaz and Jonathan, the son of Abiathar. See, here's the plan. See, I will wait at the fords of the wilderness until the word comes to me from you to inform me. So he says, hey, I'm waiting. I'm going to get on the outskirts of town. I'm going to wait, and you let me know what your sons will come and let me know what I need to do. Now, this is a sad picture here as we view this now. Remember when we talked about some of the types of David and Christ, and we talked about the Mount of Olives, how Christ went up on the Mount of Olives there to weep. This is David as he's coming down the Mount of Olives there, and he's barefooted. I don't think those are sound. He's supposed to be barefooted. He's supposed to have his head covered, and I pulled the wrong. There was another image with his head all covered and everything. But yeah, it's covered. Is that hair or covered? It's covered, right? One was white, one was black. That one looks more like hair, but his head covered. He's weeping. Everybody around him is weeping, and he's leaving the city there. So as we look, as we continue on, we're going to find another friend, Hushai. So then David follows his people, up the grade, the Mount of Olives, the summits to east of the city. Then he begins that long trek down the mountains of Jordan Plain that we saw earlier there to sea level. He's been seeking God and watching, listening for God to intervene. He's constantly in prayer. We notice in David's life, when he was in prayer and staying connected with God, things were going well. God was helping him. When he separated, when he lost, when he was not connecting with God in prayer, his life he was having struggles. And so we're going to see now, when he hears that the wisest counselor, Ahithophel, had joined Absalom, this is what David says in verse 31. Oh Lord, he knows Ahithophel is going to be the counselor, the advisor to Absalom. So this is what David asked God to do. He says, turn Ahithophel's counsel into foolishness. You're praying, we're supposed to pray for our enemies. Well, he's praying in a way for his enemy, but he's praying for foolishness. So David's encouraged to see God answering already. As he comes to the summit, he meets Hushai, the Archite, in mourning with his robed horn and dust on his head, as he's acknowledging that he's mourning at this time also. So then what we find out is, as we look at Hushai is known as David's friend. This is another friend, of course. He's probably an old man like David on the road to exile, and he'd be a burden. David says, you'll just be a burden. You're an old man like me. What can you do? What can you do to help me? But then David has the plan, he says. He wants him to offer Hushai to be an advisor to Absalom, of course, as a double agent. And so David even tells him what to say. So then this is what David tells Hushai to say. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom," this is verse 34, "I will be your servant, O king, as I have been your father's servant in the times past. So now I will be your servant. Then you will defeat for me the counsel of Ahithophel." As we continue to see these friends risking their life, he's going to go back and be there with Absalom, hopefully to be able to persuade Absalom to do things that will help David. So now we see the next person that enters is in joining or walking by was Ziba. We remember Ziba was the steward of Mephibosheth. And remember, Mephibosheth was the son the son, was he the son of Jonathan or the son of, he was the son of Jonathan, right? Not Saul. He was Jonathan's son. Is that one of the other? I'm trying. But he was the only surviving of Saul or Jonathan's family. And so here's kind of Ziba trying to take advantage of the situation. And David, David asked, where is Mephibosheth? They're always together. You're his servant. You take care of him. Where is he? And the good news is that Ziba has brought a string of donkeys saddled, loaded with 200 loaves of bread, 100 cakes of raisin, 100 cakes of figs, and a skin of wine. That's pretty welcoming as you begin and you're fixing to go on this long journey. And he has all of these supplies and food and everything for them, plus animals for them. And then David said, "Oh, where's Mephibosheth?" And here's where Ziba says, he's staying in Jerusalem in hopes of regaining the throne. We're going to find out later that David doesn't know which one, because when we see he meets Mephibosheth, he's going to have a different story, of course. And so we'll see also how David handles that situation when he wasn't sure exactly. So now as we look at Shimei, and this is a situation as David now reaches the village of Bahurim on the outskirts of Jerusalem. He's suddenly assaulted by stones and cursings being thrown from a distance. And it's Shimei, who happened to be a Benjamite, who was a follower of Saul, who was angry because David had taken over the throne from his relative or friend. And so he's mad at David. And this is what he says. Get out, you man of blood, you scoundrel. The Lord has repaid you for all the blood you shed in the household of Saul, in whose place you have reigned." So the Lord has handed the kingdom over to your son Absalom. You've come to ruin, he says. You have come to ruin because you are a man of blood. He says, all this is happening to you because you took over the throne from Saul. And then we're going to see what happens. Abishai wants to kill him. He just says, let me just run a sword through him. But no, that's not going to happen. You know, Abishai was one of the nephews he was one of the sons. Joab and Abishai were brothers who were sons of Zeruiah, who was a sister to David. So, but this is how David, remember, listen at this, David and these enemies and what they're doing. And David says to Abishai and to all the servants, "Behold, my own son seeks my life. How much more now may this Benjamite? Leave him alone and let him curse, for the Lord has told him to." How about that now? Hey, Leave him alone. Just let him keep throwing rocks and let him keep, how about turning the other cheek? It may be that the Lord will look on the wrong done to me, and that the Lord will repay me with good for his cursing today. How many times may that be a good lesson for us when we feel like somebody's mistreating us, and just say, hey, it's going to turn out okay. There's a reason for it. Just let them be. What? A man after God's own heart. Now then, we're going to see what Hushai, we look at verses, now we're in chapter 16, verses 15 through 19. While David's loyalists are leaving the city, Absalom and his army, all the men of Israel, are entering it. Hushai, the friend of the king, is there to greet Absalom with the words, "Long live the king, long live the king," though he neglects to clarify which king he's talking about. So then he goes on to say, it says that Absalom questions Hushai's quick turnaround. Hey, you were on the other side. What are you doing here? And then this was Hushai's reply to Absalom. No, the one chosen by the Lord, by these people, and by all the men of Israel, his I will be, and I will remain with him. Furthermore, whom shall I serve? Shall I not serve the Son, just as I serve the Father? So I will serve you. Who told him that? Remember, David told him, this is what you're to say to Absalom to convince him that you want to be, you're joining him, you want to be his advisor. So then we see Absalom isn't so sure, but he's happy for the support. He also doesn't include Hushai in some of the war council, and so we see there that Hushai is now going to be given an opportunity to, now as we look at chapter 17, we're going to look first at Ahithophel's counsel. I think he was like the grandfather to Abigail or something, but Ahithophel was the counselor of Absalom who had come with him. So the next order of business for Absalom now was to pursue David. David's left the town with all these people. And so Ahithophel advises immediate pursuit with the army of 12,000 men of Israel who had gathered to Absalom already. Now we're looking at chapter 17, verses 2 and 3. Here's what Ahithophel says. And for those, I did not plan. This is the first class. I have no intentions. In fact, I better not finish tonight's lesson. We'll stop where we stop, and then we will continue next week. I would attack him while he's weary and weak. I would strike him with terror, and then all the people with him will flee. I'd strike him, and I would strike down only the king and bring all the people back to you. The death of the man you seek will mean the return of all, and the people will be unharmed. It's good advice and accepted by Absalom and his counselors. David and his band had traveled about 20 miles. They're exposed. They have no shelter. There's no defensive position. Waiting to attack would allow David to find a fortified city where they'd be much more difficult. So what has to happen is, remember, the narrator had told us the Lord is determined to frustrate, as we look at verse 14, the good advice of Ahithophel's word only. In order to bring disaster on Absalom. Absalom is now governing. He's not sure of himself whether to take Ahithophel's advice only, so he's going to give Hushai an opportunity to give his plan, his advice. And of course, Hushai has a totally opposite, which is what saves David's life. First, he says, David's men are fierce fighters and will defend David like a wild bear robbed of her cubs. Then he said, he'll be inaccessible. You won't be able to find him. He won't be with his troops. He'll be hidden somewhere. And then he says, also, you may be ambushed by him if you go now before you build up your army bigger. So this alternate plan gives David an opportunity to escape. So as we see, Hushai creates a fear of attacking too soon and then inspires overconfidence in the value of waiting until they can vastly outnumber David's forces. Absalom and his men believe Hushai. And then as we'll see, then Ahithophel, as we look at verse 23, he saw that his advice had not been followed. He saddled his donkey and set out for his house. In his hometown, he put his house in order and hanged himself. Now, Hushai warns David via the priest's sons. Remember, here David is still waiting at the fords, so here's the plan. Hushai knows the advice Ahithophel has given, even before he knows what course Absalom will take. So he hurries to send word through a spy network, which happened to be the two sons of Zadok and Abiathar. Now, as we look at verse 16 and 17 of chapter 17, now therefore send quickly and tell David, do not stay tonight at the fords of the wilderness, but by all means pass over, lest the king and all the people who are with him be swallowed up. Do not spend the night at the fords in the desert. Cross over without fail, or the king and all his people with him will be swallowed up. What had happened was they had a servant girl who was going to the spring in Rikal. There you can see right here. This was where the rendezvous was, just right outside of Jerusalem there. This girl was going to fetch water, and she was going to pass the message on to Jonathan and Ahimaaz for David to leave immediately. But what happens is some of Absalom's men see the girl and the men, see the men. So what she does is she, hides them in the well, and then after the people leave, then they're able to get up out of the well in Baharim. Right here is where, right there, you see, somewhere in that area is where they were. So then they were able to be successful, and they climb out of the well. They run 20 miles and warn David, who takes immediate action to leave and goes then crossing over the Jordan, headed northeast. Eventually up to this area right here is where he is headed. So he flees to Mahanaim. The next day, David and his band marched north along the Arabah on the east side of the Jordan, and then they go up to Mahanaim. And so once he's relatively safe within the fortress city of Mahanaim, David can relax. This is what he needed to find a place of refuge. They needed to rest, and so that's where he is at this point. So then here some of his supporters from the east come and to his material aid. Now here are some more friends that we're going to see. As we look at verses 28 and 29 of chapter 17, it says, they brought bedding and bowls and articles of pottery. They brought wheat and barley and flour and roasted grain, beans, lentils, honey, curd, sheep, cheese from cow's milk for David and his people to eat. For they said, the people have become hungry and tired and thirsty in the desert. What a blessing, and what another group of friends. And we're going to see how these, quote, friends are connected with David. As we look at the first man, Shobi, he was an Ammonite. Remember in the lesson, one of the lessons that David Morrison taught on the Ammonites and how David went in and just destroyed those people. Here they are, what would be enemy. That's a lesson for us in our lives and in our friends. Sometimes people that become our friends may have been in the past, may have been someone that we didn't especially like, or it may have been even varying degrees of almost to they were enemies, or we clashed over something. But here this Shobi comes. The second person is Machir, who was from Lodabar. We also, who had previously hosted Mephibosheth, we remember Maker, but Lodabar was also one of those areas where David went in and wiped out and destroyed all of the people, what we would consider maybe to be another previous enemy. And then the third person is Barzillai. He's a wealthy man, about 80 years old, from Rogelim in Gilead. And so he loves David so much that he makes the journey. That's the first bell. He loves him so much that he's willing, to cross the Jordan on his return trip, as we see in chapter 19, verses 30 through 39. Now let's just stop a minute. We know where David is. They're resting. They've got food. They've got shelter. They're doing well. Now let's digress and go back to the city of Jerusalem, where Absalom is reigning. Back in Jerusalem, Absalom follows Hushai's counsel to gather all of Israel before attempting to go after his father, David. Several events take place. Hushai becomes Absalom's chief counselor in the place of Ahithophel. We know because Ahithophel went home and killed himself. And so we see, but Hushai, we know, is secretly loyal to David. Absalom is anointed king by all Israel in some kind of coronation, as we read in chapter 19 and verse 10, though perhaps this took place earlier in Hebron. Absalom now is so confident and so egotistical and just, he's ready to just bathe in all of his popularity and everything. So what does he do? He erects a pillar as a monument to himself in the King's Valley, as an indication of his arrogance as well as his low self-confidence. By this time, his 3 sons have presumably died, as we look at chapter 18 and verse 18. Absalom assembles a large army from all the tribes of Israel to confront David. The army is commanded by Amasa. This is going to be very interesting. Amasa was the son of Abigail, David's sister. So Amasa, who is a cousin to Joab, now we're going to Joab is quite the character. And nephew, and Joab is, of course, Amasa is a nephew of David. We know little about him except that David admires him enough to make him commander of his army to replace Joab. We're going to see that. And then I won't go there. We won't tell the rest of the story right now. I won't spoil the ending or whatever. Of course, all the ending is just history. But Absalom joins the army as they advance on David's position, moving his troops across the Jordan and camping in Gilead, east of the Jordan. So now here we see that as we're looking, and of course this was where Hebron now, there's where Absalom is. And so the battle at the forest of Ephraim. So what happens is now Absalom's men have gotten all the way up here, and they're coming into this forest of Ephraim, whereas David's group has come up here. You know, now this is where they're going to meet, right outside of Mahanaim, where David and his group had rested for a while, gotten supplies. So now they're all approaching the forest of Ephraim. And so Amasa is relatively untried as a commander compared to David's long experience and the experience of his veteran generals, Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, the Gittite. So David forms his army into 3 divisions, each one under these 3 commanders. David wants to lead his troops into battle personally, as Absalom is doing, but his men dissuade him, as we see in chapter 18, verses 3 and 4. So that's a good place to stop. Next week, we'll pick up there. Thank you for your attention, and have a great rest of the week.